Welcome to the Food Professor Podcast, presented by Cattle, Season 5, our debut episode of the brand new season. I'm Michael LeBlanc.
And I'm the Food Professor, Sylvain Charlebois.
Our very special guest this week is someone I've known for close to 20 years. He's a Canadian marketing visionary, an entrepreneur, media personality, friend of grocers and food brands alike, stage master, fellow leading independent Canadian podcaster with his Chatter That Matters pod. You know him, you love him, Tony Chapman.
Oh yeah, Tony Chapman. It's been we should have had him a long time ago. I think I've known him for 20 years as well, and frankly, he's just dynamite. He's smart. He's intriguing. He provokes thought the way I like it. I just love. Whenever I actually listen to him on stage, I would listen to him all day, to be honest. So I'm looking forward to our chat.
And we'll be seeing him in person coming up at the Coffee Association of Canada's conference coming up later in the year. We'll be back on. You'll be back on the stage. We'll be podcasting.
Yeah, I think in fact, actually, Tony invited me to a coffee chat at the coffee conference in front of people, and I think it's going to be a lot of fun. I really enjoy ad-lib. I enjoy conversations, because especially with him, I mean, he's going to be giving me some content. I'm going to give some content to him. It's going to be really great.
It's great. Well, you're both so good on your feet, so to speak. You're both entertaining and informative. So I think that would be a great session. So we'll get to our interview with Tony coming up a little later in the pod. How was your summer?
Busy. Actually, to be honest, I was expecting to take a couple of weeks off. I think I took a couple of days off.
I saw a lot of you on the media. I wasn't expecting to see you so much.
Yeah, me neither, to be honest. It got busy, and of course I was in Montreal at the cottage, and so basically spent a lot of time in Montreal, meeting catching up on some acquaintance that I do have, businesses, visited companies, met some colleagues over at McGill, went to Laval in Quebec as well. So yeah, it was very busy. How was your summer?
Summer was good. I did a bit of traveling for business. I was in Vegas.
You were
again.
Cooking a lot, I think.
A lot of episodes, a lot of pod episodes. The not pod episodes, but the barbecue show's really taken off, which is of course a lot of fun. I was in Vegas, Barcelona, a couple of places. I think Barcelona, I was there before we wrapped up season 5. I was there for work. 40 degrees, but it's a dry heat. 41 degrees when I was there.
Dry heat, 40.
It's a dry heat. So that was a pile of fun. And now I'm finishing the summer. If the listeners can kind of pick it up, I got a bit of a nasal. I got a bit of a cold. Fortunately, not COVID. And of course, I'm still got these stupid things that I still have to test to make sure I don't have COVID because I take care of my mom. But anyway, so if the listeners detect a bit of weirdness in my voice.
But you have a sexy voice.
Well, thank you very much. We, as the pod, had an excellent summer. We had an excellent response to our summer bonus series of CL podcast episodes.
Yeah.
Thank you,
lots
everybody,
of
for
reactions.
listening. Yeah, and we've actually got a few more interviews that we didn't fit into the summer, so we're going to weave those into the fall. Yeah. And of course, Colleen Martin returns as a regular guest with proprietary research from Cattle.
Colleen.
Commissioned by us just for you, the listeners. Now, coming later in September, we were super curious, both of us, about what consumers are thinking about grocery e-commerce because we heard lots of news. I think it was Empire, Sobeys, and the Voilà saying, hey, we're going to take a step back. We're going to slow our roll. We're a little disappointed. I think there's more. It's interesting because it really hasn't caught on with consumers on both sides of the border, by the way.
Yep.
And I think there's more to the story than it's just more expensive because I just think that. And so we're going to be presenting some results.
That's a great question. And by the way, kudos to you, my friend, because many months ago, you came up with the idea of surveying Canadians on cashiers standing or sitting. And I had the pleasure this summer to talk with Perbank, the CEO of Loblaw, and he was the one that actually told me that Loblaw ran a pilot. I actually didn't even talk about the survey we did. He just brought it up because he saw my column and he heard us on our podcast talking about it, and so he did basically tell me. He didn't tell me that he ran the pilot because of us, just so you know. for the record, but he did basically say that it kind of influenced their way of thinking. So the pilot is done, and so they're just looking at the issue right now as a company. So yeah, I mean, these surveys are about getting people to think differently, getting companies to think differently about the business.
Well, and I want to talk about Loblaws a little later in the show because they're testing something else. I really like the idea.
Yes.
And I've been thinking about it a lot, and we've been talking about it a lot on my other pod, Remarkable Retail, about, our latest episode was called Fail Better. And it was all about encouraging retailers, grocers, whoever, to pilot, test, fail better the next time. Just try new stuff. Don't I just try all new stuff. So it's great to hear. And we've got another
Loblaw is trying. I can tell you. I mean, I can think of 3-4 things they've announced recently, and they're trying. Sometimes they actually make a big deal of it, and sometimes they don't, like the cashier thing.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of things they try underneath the covers, so to speak, like a new robot in a warehouse.
Oh yeah.
But they got some bigger ideas that they're trying, which is pretty fun to talk about. Now we're going to spend the rest of our time together. It's kind of like what happened when we were away kind of episode. Because it wasn't a quiet summer. Like a lot of stuff happened, right?
That's the thing. And like I was hoping for a quiet summer, but it didn't happen.
Yeah, it was not a quiet summer. So let's start rattling a few of those off before we get to our interview with Tony, and then we'll wrap up the show after that. So I want to start with something that happened literally the week after we wrapped season 4, which was all the grocers finally signing the code of conduct. Now,
yes,
you struck both a positive note and I don't know if I'd call it a cautionary note, but you're like, this is good. Obviously, you've been calling for this for literally years. We now have all the major 5 signing on. I just wanted to, with a few months of soak time, so to speak, how are you feeling about the code? And tell the people what the next steps are from your understanding as well.
Well, the easy part's done. And it took years.
Don't tell Deanne and Michael that, the easy part.
I know. Well, I mean, I think they probably would agree with this. I mean, it was, just to get people to endorse the code is one thing. To get everyone to work together in the confines of a code of conduct is going to be, I think, something else. And you need leadership. It's going to be implemented in 2025. I'm looking forward to see how things go. I'm actually hopeful and optimistic that it will work out. We need something. We need to try this to make things better for our manufacturers and grocers, to be honest, and independent grocers also. So I was really, really thrilled. I think it's a big win. So I look forward to see how things go with the implementation phase, which is, in my view, going to be much more difficult.
And in some ways, much more interesting. I mean, a lot of negotiations happen behind the scenes. So now we'll get to see how's this actually going to work and what are the mechanisms? And so we'll have lots of stuff to talk about, no doubt, as we kind of move forward. It certainly was not quiet south of the border, my goodness. From an assassination attempt to a brand new candidate, Biden pushed aside Kamala Harris. Now, she's got some Canadian experience and roots, as does her VP, from the great state of Minnesota. What do you think about this development, good, bad, or indifferent, for Canada? We already see they're picking up some familiar notes about doing something about grocery prices. So they're striking some familiar notes. We've heard that narrative before, but what's your overall sense of things?
Well, I mean, it's to me, Democrats or Republicans, they both can be a pain for Canada. As far a lot of people think, well, if it's Trump, it's going to be worse. I don't know, to be honest, from a trades perspective. But what I can tell you is that certainly Democrats have made it quite clear that they're going to be going after monopolies and oligopolies. They're going to make food affordability or affordability a key issue. And I have to throw in the announcement from Couche-Tard that we learned last week that they was trying to buy 7-Eleven. And a lot of people don't know this, but Couche-Tard's market cap is $25 billion more than 7-Eleven. So this can happen. Financially, it can happen. Couche-Tard can buy the number 1 convenience store operator in the world. There's no doubt in my mind.
Which is a transaction in Japan, right? So what's the context in the U.S.? What do you think?
Just wait for it. Just wait for it. So it is in Japan, and of course, it may actually take some time. But I actually do think that Couche-Tard knows what it's doing. It's actually doing the right thing. It's a friendly offer to Japan, a very public one as well. So they're in for a few months of negotiations with the Japanese, and I think that the Japanese would be inclined to accept if all conditions are met for them in particular. But I think the biggest problem is the United States and what's going on right now with the Democrats and this debate around affordability, because, well, 7-Eleven operates in 19 countries, mainly in the United States of America. And so right now, you know what's going on with Kroger and Albertsons. I mean, it's been ugly since October 2022.
Yeah, the government, that's another thing I was going to talk about. The government has stepped in and filed suits against the merger, right?
Exactly. And they're still at it. My guess is that if Couche-Tard buys, successfully gets an offer and it is accepted, I think the biggest challenge is going to be regulators in the United States due to the political tone created by the campaign. So beyond everything, like for the rest, I think it's just noise, to be honest. But that to me is going to be a big concern looking at how the Americans are dealing with competition. And in Canada, it's still very soft. You know, the Competition Bureau is still looking at things, studying things. And I mean, the FTC is actually suing Kroger, for goodness sake. Suing. Would you see the Competition Bureau suing Loblaw here?
No, it's hard. It's hard to imagine. Now, sticking with the U.S., I want to pick up on an article I just read from David Frum, a Canadian who's actually worked for the Republicans and written actually a great book about Trump. And he talked about the cattle business and the options for the Democrats. And he just said, listen, there's a lot of stuff that goes on way out of anybody's control, from fires to drought to whatever. But he said maybe they should subsidize. Maybe there's too much consolidation around the production of beef, and maybe they should subsidize somebody to get in the game. Now, you and I were talking off mic, and you said you'd done some research on that, and there wasn't a lot of there. Huh?
Yeah, with small abattoirs. And so actually we were asked to, when I was in Guelph, we were asked by OMAFRA to look into why so many small abattoirs were closing down in Ontario. And it's a problem in Canada as much as it is in the US. And that's why there's so much consolidation. What we did learn, and it's actually a published study, it's on Google Scholar if you want to look at it. I think it was published in 2015. The outcome of the study was pretty simple. Managing abattoirs is hard, and you need competent people who understand markets, who understand how to deal with grocers, and you also need product to harvest. And sometimes grocers or producers, cattle producers, will go to the best bidder, basically. And if Americans actually come in to the auction with more money, you're out of luck. You don't have anything to slaughter. And so there's that. Food safety regulations are extremely expensive. By the end of the day, it's management and strategy. And small abattoirs tend to really fail in that regard. So the reason why many abattoirs close in Ontario, because many of them told us, it's because there's too much regulation.
Let's talk about let's move along before we get to Tony. Let's talk about the Loblaws. We mentioned it before. Their pilot. Let's call it the No Frills pilot. I think you wrote about it. I think it's in 3 cities in Ontario, and it's basically
the closest one would be to you would be St. Catharines, right?
Okay, St. Catharines, yeah.
St. Catharines, Windsor, and Brockville.
And Brockville, okay, that's interesting. So I had a couple of questions for you. One is, what I found interesting about the pilot, and I'm sure you did too, was no refrigeration. I guess the idea was it's expensive to have refrigerators in stores and the product that, refrigerated products. So let's take that out. I guess that's an assumption of 2 things. One, it must be an assumption that people will shop multiple places during the week because they're not going to get their dairy or frozen and B, who are they taking this market share from? I think they claim in the press release that they would get like 20% less prices, but of course you're not going to fill your basket. You're going to have to go somewhere else. What do you make of all this?
I'm not sure I would buy into the 20%, to be honest, because a lot of variables can.
That is the number they said, though, right?
That's the number. Yeah, that's the number.
Okay.
It's funny because that day, on the eve of the announcement, I get a phone call from Loblaw asking me if I would want to talk to Per Bank that night. So we had a chat about this, Per Bank and I, about the launch before it was announced.
Oh, interesting.
And the first thing he said was really interesting. He said, "We are no longer afraid to cannibalize ourselves."
Obviously, because they'd be in these towns. They'd be in St. Catharines. They'd be in Brockville. They'd be in all these places. Sure.
And this is really, I think, interesting news for every single Canadian, because if you're starting to see grocers not worry, and you're in retail, you're the king of retail, Michael. You know that grocers are very territorial. You're on that side of the track, I'm on this side of the track. I mean, that's how it's been, right? It's very traditional. But now, I think with this call, Loblaw is challenging all of these territorial paradigms that have actually supported the industry for a very long time, which could actually make the industry more competitive domestically, really, when you think about it. If they actually roll out that strategy, and I don't think they'll wait a year. They're going to wait 6 months, and then they'll actually deploy. And that model is really easy to deploy. You can actually cover many cities very quickly. So that to me was really the big news item out of that call.
Where do you think they they don't want to just cannibalize themselves. Who do you think they're taking that? They're going to try and take market share from somebody. Is it the dollar stores?
Strategically, the aim is clearly Dollarama and Giant Tiger.
Oh, interesting.
And what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, as I thought about, A, you're going to cannibalize yourself, and B, who in those markets is in that space? I mean, Walmart, I guess some Walmarts have no refrigeration in the smaller towns, but a lot of them are full grocers now, right? So anyway, super interesting.
There'll be some freezers, but again, actually, you can actually manage that store with very few FTEs. And it's 1,300 products, really, and most of them will be private label. And Loblaw controls their private label supply chain. So it's actually, you know what? It's a great pilot. Whether or not it's going to work, we'll see. They're aiming at small towns, so don't expect one in Mississauga, to be honest. They're aiming at markets where real estate costs are very low. And there are gaps within rural Canada, many gaps. And so I think, and I did ask Per Bank why Brockville, St. Catharines, and Windsor, and his answer was, well, it was really random. We just picked places we could actually find real estate for a while and test a model. That's basically, and it's a good approach.
Speaking of approaches, you just talked about it a little bit. I was reading this. It was on BNN today. This woolly-headed academic talking about private label, and that it was really almost covertly a strategy by grocers to push brands out of the store and then raise the prices of the private label. Is there any basis in fact in that? It doesn't sound at all to me like what the strategy for private label is. But where's that coming from?
I don't know what's going on with the Globe and Mail, to be honest. They're public, like with journalists, it's fine. I mean, the coverage, some of the investigation they're leading is great. But with op-eds, their selection process is really, really odd.
There's one in there today about nationalizing the railway. Like that worked in the 70s. We denationalized it.
And the op-ed doesn't even mention that we actually had a nationalized railway system before.
And it was a shit show, right? It was not good.
I know.
It was not good.
Exactly.
I mean, it worked. It worked in the 1800s when we needed to build the railroad, and then it didn't work for like 100 years, and now we
because you don't need 100 vice presidents. I mean, you create top-heavy organizations, and they become inefficient. That's basically how crowns work in Canada. If you want a crown corporation, great.
Air Canada, right? Air Canada used to be a crown corporation as well. It's kind of beyond the memory, and we got a better airline now, though they might be striking as well in the 70s.
But strikes aren't necessarily a bad thing. I mean, there are always going to be some. If you remember correct, I mean, I remember when CN was public. When CN was actually owned by government, they were labor disputes.
Sure.
They were labor disputes. And so So I
think
CN is in better shape. I mean, it's making a lot of money. CPQC is making a lot of. These companies are making a lot of money. Are they well managed? I'm not a railway expert. I would say yes, but I've always believed from a policy perspective to make things more reassuring for all food companies out there, from farm gate to store and restaurants. We absolutely need to make food supply chains an essential service as soon as possible. And it was in our report a couple of years ago. We talked about it on our podcast.
Right, and that big supply chain report that it was there in print, right?
It was there.
And from my understanding of these things, that actually is not, it's neutral to positive for labor, right? Because then there's rules in place, there's arbitration, which is happening anyway. So is that your understanding as well?
That's right. And you need to recognize workers' rights as much as possible. And so look at the BC port situation last year. BC ports went on strike, but they had to continue to move grains along to the Vancouver port, so to service Asia and things like that. So we need to nationalize that philosophy as soon as possible, instead of actually, keeping the entire economy hostage, especially the agri-food sector, in August and September of all times.
Well, and as you know, it wasn't just August. I mean, I talked to some of my clients had been preparing since May, because you have to prepare that it's going to happen.
Oh yeah,
it was on again and off.
It takes work, costs money. It takes time.
It's horribly inefficient. Now let's talk to someone who's not horribly inefficient. Let's get to our interview. I don't know what, that's a weird segue, but let's get to our interview.
He's pretty efficient. He's a workhorse.
That's true. Yeah. But first we're going to hear from, of course, our wonderful presenting sponsor from Cattle.
Ever feel like the world of ratings and reviews needed a superhero? Well, enter Cattle, the caped crusader with Canada's largest, most diverse, and daily active consumer panels. That's right, Cattle is not your average podcast sponsor. So why choose Cattle? Because Cattle excels in consumer insights from your consumer, while also blazing trails in the realm of ratings and reviews, pioneering the future landscape of user-generated content. Beyond the valuable syndicated receipt data, they stand as unparalleled collector of reviews at scale, irrespective of category or price point. A testament to their impact, partnerships with giants like Walmart, Canadian Tire, and more. Visit AskCattle.com now for an exclusive The Food Professor podcast listener discount on your first review or research campaign today. That's AskCattle.com.
Well, we're back, and as a first guest for our 5th season, I don't think we could have actually gotten someone more famous. The incredible Tony Chapman is joining us today. I can't believe it that we have Tony on for the first time on our podcast. Hey, Tony, how you doing?
I'm doing wonderful, and right back at you. You two do such a great job. Food means the world to us, and the fact that you're out there day in and day out, just really talking about the world of retail, the world of food, I just think it's music to a lot of people's ears.
I assume a lot of people know you, but for some of the folks out there who don't know who Tony Chapman is, and tell us more about you and your podcast, Chatter That Matters. That is a top-ranked podcast in Canada. Tell us more about who you are and what you do.
The best way to describe me is a serial entrepreneur. My entire life has been focused on insights, trying to understand the audience's head, heart, and hands, how they think, how they feel, more importantly, how they act, and drawing upon that intelligence, helping clients design the kind of content that matters. And out of that came this podcast, Chatter That Matters, which is really stories about people overcoming circumstances to chase their dreams, and when they do, change their world and ours for the better. And out of that, interesting enough, came Chatter AI, Content That Matters. It combines everything I've done in my life and using artificial intelligence to really try to give my clients an advantage, try to get a way that they can get heard in this age of noise.
Interesting. So Chatter AI, so how does that work? Is it launched already, or are you launching it in the fall? So what is it? How do you help your customers?
Well, the best way to describe it is if you take any client, I can take him into a virtual room and I can say, look over on the left, and there's 3 to 5 million comments that consumers have made about you and your category. And I can wave a magic wand and I can organize them in terms of how they think, feel, and act. I can organize it in terms of where they are in the buying process. What are the things they're interested in? But before you get too excited, if you look on the other side of the room, I've also organized 100,000, maybe 500,000 pieces of content from your direct competitors, your indirect. I've even looked around the world and tried to see what really resonates with the consumer and what has virality and what are the things that have somehow found a way through this noise. And by taking that intelligence and then compressing it together, what I can draw is a winning hand that really identifies the insights that matter, ideas that really we should be focused on, product development we should be considering, and most importantly, the kind of content that we create that engages. It's almost like, if you can think of an analogy, is fly fishing with the right bait at the right time, based on what that consumer really wants and needs, versus just this sort of proclamation that Coke is it or Pepsi's the choice of the new generation. Really focusing and zeroing in on what matters.
That's great. Congratulations, Tony, on that launch. Great idea. Michael?
Yeah, I can't imagine, again, a better guest to kick off our season, and particularly with the questions that we've kind of come up with. And Tony, we want to tap into this wisdom, both your earned wisdom over the many years and the wisdom you continue to accumulate today. And I want to start at small, new food brands. You know, Sylvain and I have a lot of love for the CL Innovation Show. We do notice, though, that, you know, we've said this a few times, last year's winner of the Innovation Award was bankrupt in 6 months. Innovation is tough. It's tough to get accepted by the market. What's your best advice and how small brands can break through and get their space on the grocery shelf?
Well, a common theme that might resonate in the show is this age of noise. There's too much and too many chasing a finite amount of time. That's a math problem. Second thing is, you got a consumer that used to be a consumer of content's now a creator. So they're really not paying a lot of attention to what's new out there. So if you're a small brand, first of all, make sure there's an unmet need. Not just an idea you like, but it's an idea that if you put it in front of the right consumers, they're going to go, that's something that I've been looking for, or that's something that I'd be interested in trying. So to do so, you really got to think of the consumer as a journey. How can you help them get to where they want to go? So if you're that new brand and you're focusing on nutrition, it's not just the fact that you might be combining a couple of interesting supplements or vitamins, but is this a longevity play? Is this somebody that's 80 and wants to look 50? Is this somebody that just had a grandchild and wants to be healthy enough to watch them graduate? Is this a young person trying to do 26 hours in a 24-hour day? Put your focus and your lens and your antenna on the consumer, their journey, where they're heading, and then legitimately ask yourself, does this brand or service or product help them get to where they want to go? That's your first thing. That's the second thing is, you got to say, where am I going to build this brand? How am I going to get traction? Everybody wants to start in Walmart or Loblaw. You're going to get lost in those stores. You're going to pay a fortune to be in those stores. My next thing is, find the retail channels online and bricks and mortar that really are relevant to who you are. You know, if you got a new energy drink for kids that you know, why not sample it at a kids like teenagers, young adults, sample it where they are. Is it a comic store? Is it if older adult? Is it young adult? Is it cannabis store? Find a way where they're already there. They've got an appetite and a zest for life, and say, that's where I'm going to first build the brand. And as it starts growing, build your distribution points. And then when it gets to be big enough, Loblaw and Walmart are going to go after you versus you going on your knees and saying, please take it. So less is more. Plant the seed, grow it, fertilize it, prune it, take care of it. Don't try to solve everything in a day, and build that following. And if that's not enough advice, watch every rock documentary you can about artists that somehow found a way to go from being unknown in a bar to headlining main stadiums because they had the same problem you did. They had to build a following.
Let's adjust our lens and talk about the big brands. I mean, you know, they're duking it out. They're power play. They're massive. There's consolidation. We see that every day. Sylvain and I were talking about it as one of the major things that happened over the summer. Now, you know, we see these brands kind of seeming to be doing this, what I'd call the shrinkflation hustle, right? I'm going to sell you the same price point, but I'm going to sell you less. And, you know, I'm going to hit that cash flow consumer. But really, and it's not a new problem. And a lot of brands introduce a lot of products that just go nowhere. So what's your advice to the big brands today to do the same thing, cut through that clutter and win with the grocers?
Well, the first insight you came out with is there's no longer a flight to value, there's a stampede. And Sylvain talks about it a lot in his media, that we're seeing consumers are saying, I don't care about frills, I don't care about value added, I don't care about your points. What I care about is putting food on the table for my family. So the first thing you're dealing with is the shrinkflation. Everybody's trying to do smoke and mirrors to get their price point. It's almost like the aggregators in travel. I'm going to tell you can fly from Toronto to Montreal for $400, but then you realize you have to pay for your seat and your baggage and everything else. So first thing is everything's trying to get the price point. But the second thing that I'm seeing, which is really interesting, is how do I create an itch, get an end aisle display, get on that action alley where I can go from selling a half a dozen units to hundreds of units over the weekend. And what's interesting to me is these mashups. Even last week we saw Kentucky Fried Chicken and KD, Kraft Dinner, come together, or Coke and Oreo. So what they're doing now is saying, if I just introduce a new flavor of Oreos, yawn, really not going to make any kind of news. But if I kind of mess with the consumer's mind and half the consumers go, I can't believe how gross that sounds, and the other half goes, I wonder how that tastes, then all of a sudden this mashup suddenly lifts the brand up. And if you're smart with your retail strategy, you go and say, look, at two of the shelves of that end aisle, we're going to put Oreo and Coke, and then we're going to put our other family of Oreo products. So that's the second thing I'm seeing on it. And then the third thing that I'm seeing is a lot of rationalization. And sadly, this is happening in Canada, where these big multinationals go, by the time I duke it out at the end of the year, I've got X dollars, but they're Canadian dollars. I turn them into US dollars. Is Canada worth it anymore? And we're seeing major brands leave our country right now because economically, we don't have the ability for them to make profit. So lots of things going on. But I would say if I was a big brand, more than anything else, you got to create some noise, because I would sadly say your category is essentially commoditized. Private label's done a great job saying you can get the same thing, equal stature for less price. You got to find a way to create a niche. And to me, mashups are probably the most interesting thing I'm seeing for big commoditized brands in grocery stores.
I want to follow a thread that somebody said to me on an interview. I was interviewing someone who focused on marketing to new Canadians. And he said something I thought was very insightful. He said that used to be a growth strategy. Now it's the growth strategy. How do you think about marketing to the millions, literally millions and millions of new Canadians?
It depends on where you are. If you go as a mass strategy, you're going to fail with it because, for example, Toronto, half the people who live in Toronto now would identify themselves as newcomers or, first generation. And they're coming with a whole different set of their taste buds, the brands they're familiar with. So you've got to make sure your ethnic play is mainstream. You get out into the suburbs, you get into the rural areas. To me, your ethnic strategy is less about I have enough consumers to satisfy, and more because of the internet and the world created a niche that Canadian that's never tried Pakistani food might actually enjoy it. Or here's a curry that I can bring to you. So it's almost taking what I would consider mainstream ethnic foods to the masses with a twist. That to me, so it'd be very different strategies. One is where I've got the population, you got to own it, and you got to think of this as mainstream. As I move out, you got to think of this as an opportunity to drive traffic, create some interest, impulse sales, and even in doing so, create some impulse margin, incremental margin.
Let's shift gears a little bit, Tony. And I know that you're really good at reading the room when it comes to trust, consumer trust, and reputations. And let's face it, if you just spend 2 minutes on social media, and you can feel that a lot of people are concerned about the food industry. There's some trust issues there, absolutely. So, how do you see this situation right now in 2024? Do you see this as an issue? Do you think that the industry has done the best it can dealing with what it was given, or could they do more, really?
Well, I think that you got to separate rhetoric from reality. The rhetoric is, when politicians get hold of this and try to deflect their population around from how unaffordable Canada is, and they want to always take the big brand in every category and make them the enemy number one. They're the reasons why. And then you have the reality, which is what you do, is you actually use math and statistics to explain what is going on. So, but there's very different. The trouble is in today's snackable content and social media sound bites, people just grab onto a headline and start professing like they know everything versus actually listening to the professor. So that's the first thing, rhetoric and reality. Second thing, can grocery stores do a better job? I think that they lacked a lot of self-awareness for a long time where, Galen Weston did such a brilliant job when life was affordable, being the guy that the uncle at the party that would sit there and tell you how to make chili. He took like Dave Nichols and made it more of the friendly uncle. He was accessible. He was a normal guy. But the problem is when the world started getting unaffordable, he became enemy number one because he was the person that was the billionaire getting richer every day at your expense. And that's the danger when you make the lead singer of your band the person that also owns the company. It can work very well in good times and it can come back and haunt you in bad times. But if I was grocery stores, I'm not sure what else you can do, but until the consumer understands the math, where the margins are made, how inflation's roaring through the entire supply chain, what the role of dairy boards are, and for example, till they understand that in complex issue, the easiest thing they'll grab onto the soundbite is that the rich get richer. Why I've got to run to the food bank, and that's could they do a better job? I'm not sure because honestly, so that the intelligent people listen to you because they want to understand. That they want to know that there's complexity and that you've synthesized it. Sadly, more often than not, and we're seeing it in politics, we're certainly seeing it in brand reputation scores, snackable content that people drop kerosene on and add a little bit of wind to is really, sadly, the song of the day.
Yeah, no, I agree entirely. It's a bit out of control, and it's hard for grocers to maneuver through all the noise going on right now, and a lot of it is just unpredictable for sure. Michael,
it is. When they refuse to sign the grocery conduct, when they and then they get out there and talk about that they're doing everything they can. They look very reactive to it. So very proactively, the same way when you go and pump your gasoline now and you see that sign from Esso telling you how much money is actually taxes and how much is gas. And you start realizing you start understanding the dynamics of petroleum. Maybe they should start doing a better job really educating the shopper every time they shop at the grocery store, what is involved in the food chain and where do they influence it and where are other areas we should be looking for some savings in terms of making things more affordable.
Mm.
Yeah, no kidding. All right. So, this kind of follows on some of the suggestions you've had. If Sylvain and I could wave a magic wand and poof, you become the CEO of a major Canadian grocer, what's the first three things you do?
I think the first thing is that I have a two-pronged strategy. The first, it would be value and be valued. And what I mean by that is value as a stampede to affordability. This life of uncertainty and insecurity that too many Canadians are facing. You've got to signal every day value. And you got to do that by really understanding the food basket, the necessities, and do everything you can to give the best possible price. And it's not just shrink inflation. It's really taking some frills out, everything you can to cut costs. Be valued. If I was a grocery store like a Longo's or a Loblaw, more mainstream that still need that sort of higher end shopper, I'd be focusing again on human journeys and saying, because I'm not sure when I look at longevity, I think of Loblaw. I'm not sure when I'm looking at my digestive system, I'm thinking of a Longo's. I'm not sure that when I'm thinking of my family nutrition and my young kids not having sugar crashes in elementary school, that I'm thinking of my grocery store. Yet food is the answer to so much of preventative health. And I think grocery stores have got to start really stepping up and educating consumers that there's a lot that they could be choosing with their food budget that would make for a better life and a healthier life. That's what I would do. Value, make sure in the basic food necessities, we're doing everything we can. Be valued because the role food can play in helping me get more life out of life. Combine the two, and I think you got a winning strategy.
Well, last words of advice, and I'm going to frame it in the 2 starts and 1 stop. And I guess this is a big question because we're talking to anybody in the food business here, whether it's a brand, small, big, grocer, whoever, anybody in this wonderful business. 2 things they should start doing if they're not, and 1 thing they should definitely stop doing because maybe it never worked to begin with, or maybe it just doesn't work anymore.
I think the first thing is really what we've talked about all along is that head, heart, and hands, or the consumer journey. Understand the consumer, the circumstances they're trying to overcome, what they're trying to chase in life, and build your brand and business around that, as opposed to building it around the categories and building it around the ways I've always done things. Understand that food means the world to us, and what can we do to help consumers to get most of that world? That would be that. And really the second thing is just take a look at my private label strategy and focus again on value and be valued. Much like what Loblaw started and some of the others, you have this no frills. It's as basic as you can get. Maybe it's the same package. It's the same recycling package that you bring and do everything.
Are you worried about a perception that it's pay less, get less? You know, to put a fun twist on the Target slogan, which was pay less, get more. Like it seems some of the latest initiatives are you pay less, but you get less too. Are you worried about that, or is that on note?
I don't think so on the value plant, because you're saying to people, this is the most important thing to you. Bring a recyclable container and fill up your cereal that way. Fill up your packaging. It's good for the planet. It's good for you. We're going to save a lot of money. That's what I would really focus on that. And then on the other side of private label, do what Dave Nichols did years ago, where you imagine him macheting his way through the jungle to find the perfect ingredients to create the right sauce and romance the food.
Yeah.
But I think the private labels kind of blended together, and I that's what I would be doing, is separating it. In terms of stopping, there's too much and too many, as I said, chasing it. So much of this marketing, these offers, the consumer is not interested in it. I would really focus on what matters most. I would reorganize my grocery stores, because people are shopping for school lunches. They're shopping for backyard barbecues. They're not shopping meat and dairy and organic and private label. Try to find a way to organize your stores the way consumers are thinking about organizing their pantry. And I think if we sort of stop doing what we used to do and start doing maybe what the consumer wants, I think we would have an opportunity to redefine grocery and make it a very exciting place to shop. And in terms of online, I'm competing against online grocers, which is really not doing very well in Canada. Remember, I can't squeeze the Charmin online. Make your grocery stores exciting, displays, color, energy, experiences, tasting, sampling, adventure, so that when I go into that store, I almost like I used to go to a Costco in the States. It was my date night on Friday nights. Think about my grocery store as this incredible odyssey of adventure. And if I can do that,
and discovery, adventure, and discovery, yeah,
discovery. If I do that, so that's what I'd be focusing on. But no one's offered me the job yet. But if,
like I said, if we had the magic wand, you'd get the nod. Like, listen, we've only scratched the surface on your wisdom, and if the folks listening want to get in touch or learn more, where do they go?
chatterthatmatters.ca, or wherever you get your podcast, just download Chatter That Matters. We're usually two steps below you guys because you're just so good at what you do. But we're both up there as great Canadian podcasts, so you can find it there.
I would listen to you all day, Tony, to be honest. It's just incredible. I've heard the name Dave Nichols, I think, more times in this past year than the last 20 years. Something's going on here. There's lots of nostalgia going on.
Well, it's the adventure he brought to food. The Insider's Report was something I wanted to read. Food and Drink and LCBO just came a high-end, elitist thing. When his Insider was so good because the average person could put a little bit of this special sauce on their ribs and tell people that you're having ribs.
His style was non-assuming too. His style really worked as well.
I think they did that with Galen, and then the trouble is, Dave Nichols was a natural impresario. Galen was very good at delivering content, but when the world changed, they didn't have Plan B set up for Galen, and all of a sudden the politicians were dragging him in front of in Ottawa, and he showed up in a suit instead of a sweater, and but listen, you're going to build you make that your lead singer, And the world changes. It goes from rock and roll to punk, and you still want to be playing music. You gotta realize you got to change with it.
Exactly. Listen, Tony, thank you so much for your time, and best of luck to you with your new projects this fall.
I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on. Looking forward to hearing it, and we'll share it as much as I can.
Let's wrap up with a couple of more issues. Let's talk about temporary foreign workers, which is particularly a flashing point even this week with the Liberal government, pulling back significantly. The hue and cry from industry about. We've talked about this before. It's a broader issue beyond the scope of this podcast. It's probably been the largest public policy failing at all levels, not just federal, but provincial, temporary foreign workers and the housing crisis. The largest, I think, most significant public policy failing in my time, in my history that I can remember. We've got millions of new Canadians. We're not building houses. They're stacking up like cordwood in places like Brampton, where these poor kids have been no place to live, no prospects, and they're brought in on the cheap. Anyway, there's so much to unpack here, but let's keep this focused because it's a big issue. Let's keep this focused on the food business. Now, we know temporary foreign workers are an essential, valued part of the agricultural system, have been for many, many decades. I know farmers will find them places to live, and that's a long. Now, what do you make of what's this toing and froing? And you've got these big chains. You're saying, listen, I can't operate without these people. What do you make of all this?
First of all, I think they made the right decision. It was late, obviously, but they made the right decision. The program started in 1973 under Trudeau, father, and it was expanded by Chrétien, another Liberal prime minister. That program, that cheap labor program, was created by Chrétien in I believe it was in 1993 or 94. I can't remember. Anyways, that really has become the bulk of the foreign worker program. And when you look at agri-food in general, a lot of nodes do rely on that program now. Now, with the announcement that we heard this week, what we learned is that most of these workers won't be impacted by the change. There were no details provided, but I hope it's true, because for farmers and for everyone like manufacturers, I've visited plants. I saw they're everywhere.
Yeah, of course,
absolutely. And frankly, I always felt uneasy about the program, because it's not incentivizing companies to reinvest in automation, in intelligence, and it provides them with a way out, so to speak. And frankly, we all know what's going on with youth unemployment in Canada. It's really, really high.
Sure.
And that's part of the reason why. Now, my understanding is that food service was not spared, and this is really, I think, where this change is going to be impacting the agri-food
I know
sector.
The Restaurant Association, Kelly's, they're up in arms about it. No consultation.
They are, and
they seem to be caught
only
off guard.
3% of all employees are actually hired within that program. I find that hard to believe. I think it's probably more. But anyways, I think they're in for a ride here, because I know a lot of restaurants do rely on that program now, and they're going to be forced to think differently about hiring and managing HR. So I think food service, especially fast food, is going to be really impacted by changes announced this week. Over the short term, over the long term, well, as we get more details about farming, about manufacturing, then we'll be in a better position to assess. Was the announcement a surprise to you, Michael?
No, I think the Liberals had to come out with something. They're getting pummeled with it. Listen, it's one thing to have 1 million temporary foreign workers. Like I said, though, they're stacking up like cordwood. There's nowhere to live. These restaurants aren't giving them trailers to live in like the farmers do. There's nowhere to live. You look at these pictures of landlords selling a bed in the middle of a kitchen for $600 a night. It's not
sad.
fair. It's not fair. It's close. It's close to. it's close to fraud. These kids have been brought over.
It's important to remind ourselves that when we talk about foreign workers, we're talking about human beings.
Yeah,
really, and we're also talking about companies trying to plan. So things need to be predictable for them.
Yeah.
And so right now we have a government that opened up the floodgates to immigration and basically called out any politicians that was against having more immigration as racist, un-Canadian, xenophobic. Those are the things that liberals have said, and now this policy.
Well, I was reading some great Angus Reid research on this, and basically Canadians' attitudes towards immigration has not changed. They're very positive to it, like relentlessly positive.
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
It's
how it's managed,
right? Exactly, and where the people live, and how many at one time.
Yeah.
Listen, the population birth trajectory is just like it is in the U.S. Flat to down. In fact, it's not flat at all. It's down.
We need more immigrants in Canada. I think everyone agrees with that. But we do have a GDP per capita recession.
Well, we've got a bunch.
We've welcomed a lot of new people, and our economy is going nowhere. So we need to figure that nut out.
Yeah.
And once we do, then we can actually start welcoming more people again.
Yep. I'd like to see a pause because we just need to catch up. We need to catch up building houses. Immigration is essential.
Build skills, train people. But actually today I was talking to someone in Quebec City. I heard that some foreign workers have become Canadian and they're actually buying a McDonald's together.
Interesting.
Isn't that cool?
Innovation, right? Immigrants, new Canadians bring a lot of innovation.
So they're investing in Canada. They've become Canadian. So there's some great stories that we need we need to remind ourselves there's some great things that can happen with these programs as long as they're well managed.
Yeah, absolutely. Who knows? Maybe some of these kids brought over to master Excel in these fraudulent schools can maybe frame a house. Maybe learn how to frame a house.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Maybe it'll all come together. Some bad news, right? About people dying drinking plant-based beverages over the summer. Kind of shocking. I mean, you made the point that, don't think this is just, plant-based beverages are not somehow exempt from all the bad things that can happen to foods. I mean, this seems to have been lingering on for a while. And is it done now? Are we okay with it? What are your thoughts on that?
It was a bizarre situation because when you think about a listeria recall, because it was listeria, a lot of people thought immediately about Maple Leaf in 2008.
Yeah.
And media was all over that recall. 23 Canadians died, unfortunately. There were many cases that were unresolved, but it was a mess. It was a high volume product. McDonald's, Tim Hortons were involved. And of course, Maple Leaf had to apologize to the Canadian public on August 18th, 2008. But they actually got in front of it at some point. They actually, they had a press release every day. They informed the public about what was going on at the
crisis management. Yeah.
Oh yeah, they were really out there. Danone, nothing. There was a press release on July 19th. And that was it. I mean,
it was a contractor plant, right? It was a contractor plant or something.
Contractor plant, and of course, because they packaged, it was a co-packer, and they co-packaged Silk and Great Value by Walmart. And but to be honest with you, I don't think that. I think Danone should have been more involved. I think because there was a lot of questions like, why did someone die in August of 2023, and the recall was done on July 8th, 2024, almost a year later. And what happened at the plant? What are your plans? How are you addressing the issue? And these are all questions we got answered from Maple Leaf, but not this time. And so I was a little bit disappointed with on the CFI side, I think they actually managed things the way they could, but it is a summer recall as Maple Leaf was. In the summer, you got to be more proactive.
You got to work hard to get attention, right? You got to work
because
hard
people don't listen to the news as much, and there were the Olympics going on and everything else. And so, and in 2008, there were the Olympics in Beijing. And so you really had to be deliberate. you have to be deliberate coming out with your risk communication strategy. And so I thought it was a bit disappointing.
All right. Well, it's fantastic to be back on the mic. So much fun. I hope the listeners enjoyed our summer, and we got a great season ahead of us. We're just kicking it off. We're going to go all winter. We got a bunch of great guests already lined up, and we'll be at the coffee conference. We'll be at Seattle again next year. That's next year. We're talking about that next year. We're doing all kinds of stuff. So anyway, it's great to be back. I'm Michael LeBlanc, consumer growth consultant, media entrepreneur / maven, and a bunch of other stuff. And you are?
I'm the food professor, Sylvain Charlebois.
All right, everybody. See you next week. Enjoy that. For those of you who got kids, back to school time. And we'll be talking a bit about back to school next week, actually. Talk some back to school economics.
Pumpkin spice, probably.
Pumpkin. Well, we did talk about leadership changes at Starbucks. I do want to talk about that. All right, everybody. See you next week.
Take care, folks.